But when Epstein killed himself, and I believe that he killed himself.
You do believe he killed himself?
Yeah, I can set that out at great length, but I won't, because we're 2 hours pretty much already. I'll set it out briefly.
Okay.
There's a friend of mine called Chris Atkins who's written a very funny book called A Bit of a Stretch, and he was a former Panorama producer, freelance, who ended up in a tax scam and got done by the British taxman and went to prison, sentenced for 5 years, and spent 9 months in Wandsworth, which is a terrible nick in London. Routinely, sex offenders and, worst of all, paedophiles were abused in prison, and according to his own personal observation, prison officers didn't bother check up on paedophiles because they wanted them to die. So that my friend Chris, it's a British prison, not an American prison, but this is not a conspiracy theory. This is observed experience of prison culture. A convicted paedophile like Jeffrey Epstein back in again for greater and better charges of paedophilia is going to have a horrible time in prison from everybody, including the prison guards. So I think it's very likely that they didn't bother check on them, that they didn't care. I think that Epstein was a clever and manipulative man, but also he realized he'd run out of road and there was no good defense for what he'd done. And therefore he was looking at life. And this was a way of saying, fuck you. And he was that kind of guy who would do that. Thirdly, I would say that there was a pathologist hired by Jeffrey Epstein's brother, who I think is called Dr. Baden, who went on Fox to say that there's a bone there called hyoid bone was broken, and that is evidence of murder, not suicide. So, being a good reporter, I checked this with an American pathologist, and it's in the podcast, who set out the evidence by going through something like 168 definite suicides by hanging, and found that 2/3 of the cases the hyoid bone was broken.
Really?
Yes, really. And the older the deceased, the more likely the hyoid bone would be broken. So when I say that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself, I'm not arguing with Donald Trump for a gag. I'm setting out the known evidence, which is number one. There is a culture inside prisons in Britain and the United States and around the world that hates paedophiles.
Mm-hmm.
The prison guards should have been checking on him. They didn't, because they didn't fucking care. Number two, Chris says that the prison estate in British prisons and American prisons is always rubbish. The CCTV cameras didn't work. That's normal. Nothing works in prison, because when you complain, nobody gives a fuck because you're a prisoner. Number three, the physiological evidence that points to murder is rubbish. The physiological evidence, i.e. the pathological evidence, points to suicide, not murder. And the advance of the suicide version is not supported by science. If you doubt me, listen to my podcast, Hunting Gillem.
Final question. If you were to be able to sit down with Ghislaine right now, what would you ask her?
My question would be, did Robert Maxwell fuck you up?
Why that question?
Did her father cause her to be where she is now? Because he was an abusive personality. There's you don't have to go where this woman Eleanor Berry goes. One of her brothers, Ian Maxwell, said that when he heard that his father had died, he felt both fear of what to do next, but also a sense of exhilaration that this alpha male had gone from his life. So you can just use that to say, did he? So it's possible. I don't know where it goes, this court case. I'm fascinated to watch it. If I can, I'll try and get to New York. But we'll see. I'm sorry, I'm going on pointless. Oh no, I'm going on for a reason, because this troubles me. I don't know what's going to happen. At the moment, there is, it seems, 3 witnesses to abuse, and the charges relate primarily to 1994 to 1997. So the stuff we all know about, all the stuff, for example, that's in the Netflix documentary, Virginia Roberts Giuffre, she meets them in 2000. She meets Prince Andrew in 2001.
Conveniently not a part of her charges.
Not in the charges. Now, conveniently is a loaded adverb, and one should always avoid loaded adverbs.
Okay, noted.
They may have done that. The feds may have done it is because they don't want to put Virginia Roberts Giuffre in the witness box lest she gets something wrong, which is not to say that she's right fundamentally. But abuse victims often make poor witnesses. That's an argument that's been put to me. I don't know. My judgment about what she says about Prince Andrew and her, I think that, Prince Andrew can't explain the photograph. Virginia Roberts can. I think Virginia Roberts is telling the truth, but for whatever reason, the feds aren't going there. There's a qualification for this, which is that they're going there on the, they've also charged Ghislaine with perjury, and it's possible they can take some of the perjury stuff and chuck it, but they're not, they're being careful about the timeline because I think they want a conviction. Had Epstein still been alive, Ghislaine's route to a soft sentence would have been giving the dirt on Jeffrey Epstein. Once he died, I think he killed himself, then that possibility for a plea, the value of a plea to the feds is gone. So what she's offering. What she could do is say, I was a victim of Jeffrey Epstein. I was also a victim of my father, and I'm terribly sorry. But I was not in sound mind when I did this. Her problem with that is that she should have said that the moment Jeffrey Epstein died. If I was her, I would have done it the second he died, and I would have given a press conference saying, it's the first time I can talk about this, but I feel desperately sorry for the victims, Virginia Roberts included. But I got this entirely wrong because I was manipulated by this man, and it's only now that he's dead that I can talk about this. Instead, she disappeared. That's a big problem for her. As I said, she denies any wrongdoing. She denies all the charges against her. And fair's fair. I believe passionately in the rule of law, and I believe in innocence or proven guilty. So we're going to have to wait and see what she says and what her defense is. I feel sorry for her. I do. But it doesn't mean I don't think, I think the evidence against her is damning. I'm fascinated, as I said, to see what's going to happen. But I do feel sorry for her. She's in a horrible place, in an awful prison. and this horrible stuff from her past is coming back to her. At the same time, I also feel desperately sorry for the victims. Virginia Roberts Giuffre is the most famous. I believe what she says. I do. And I think people are responsible for their actions. Anyway, we have to, we'll see how it plays.
John, I can't thank you enough for doing this, man. I really appreciate it. I'm a huge fan of your work.